Hi everyone, my name is Mariana and the title of my paper is Mao Tzu and the Modern Novel, Ethics of Engagement. Paul Giaimo intends in his book Appreciating Don DeLillo to locate DeLillo within the field of the novel. Is the American writer a modernist, a postmodernist, or a neorealist? Following the thread of the intertextual relation between DeLillo and Algren, Giaimo concludes that neorealism would be the most precise category, since in it the writer has an ethical relation with reality. Here, the critic positions himself against the tradition that precedes him. As he states, a major trend in DeLillo criticism is to identify the author as a postmodernist. So the absolute postmodernist would say that DeLillo's work, ironically, undercuts our attempts to read it for a deeper level of meaning. This postmodern reading of DeLillo departs from the novel's explicit dialogue with postmodernist discourses. Many of the problems targeted by Baudrillard or Jameson appear thematized in Mao Tzu. At the beginning of the text, for example, rows of books speak to Scott. They say, quite literally, buy me. A couple of pages later, Scott wanders through the images that give the title to the novel. Andy Warhol appears as a visual reference for the intersection between art and commodity. The commodification of culture is one of the most important thematic threads in the novel. It appears as a theme, but also as the content of the characters' dialogues. Bill Gray, the protagonist of Mao Tzu, asserts, "In our world we sleep and eat the image, and pray to it, and wear it too." The postmodern proliferation of images appears as both form and content of Mao Tzu. This self-reflexivity seems to make of Mao Tzu a postmodern novel. As Herren asserts, DeLillo's engagement with his times has involved confronting and reflecting back the epidemic spread of unreality, a haunted fun house where images have become detached and indistinguishable from the real-world reference. Metafiction identifies and critiques this predicament from the inside by replicating the mirror maze. The writer's compromise with reality would spring from the metafictional form of the novel. By replicating the way the contemporary world makes meaning, the novel would expose this meaning-making machinery. It would turn us into aware, active, self-reflexive readers. This postmodern reading of Mao Tzu, nevertheless, does not account for the opening and closing scenes of the novel. Both partake in a vivid representation of reality. Even though the novel does engage with the postmodern, Mao Tzu subverts postmodern discourses in two critical moments: in the mimetic opening and closing scenes, and in the character of Brita. In terms of form, the opening and closing scenes depicts reality in the manner of the modern novel. There is a reality, a referent that the novel represents. The novel thus does not renounce its mimetic representational force. On the other hand, on a thematic level, Brita thematizes the problem of an artist that has an ethical relation with reality. In both instances, what lays at the center is an ethical project, where the postmodern bypasses the problem of ethics completely by making everything discursive. The only possible redemptive power, for Baudrillard for example, is shock and discontinuity. In the novel, in Mao Tu, The Reign of the Terrorists, the return to the modern realism would imply a compromise with reality in the Lilo. By signaling that in Mao Tu there are realist, referential, ethically engaged passages, I would like to suggest that, although heterogeneous, the novel in the Lilo still upholds the representational power of the moderns. So, the first part of the essay will be dedicated to the postmodern in Mao Tu. The postmodern moment, iconicity and Mao Tu. The scopic self-reflexivity of the book, what Austen calls spectacular authorship, raises the problem of the writer as an icon. That is the problem of the contemporary circulation and reproduction of images. What is at stake in the book is the mechanical reproduction of the work of art. The sheer proliferation of images in the text complicates not only notions as authorship and mass culture, but seems to put the concept of representation in crisis. The novel here is not a modern mimesis of reality, but a postmodern simulacrum. When Gombrich coins the term iconology, he historicizes vision. Our ways of seeing reality have changed. Every age has a different semiotic constellation. By approaching the novel from its treatment of the visual, I hope to unveil how the text iconology brings to light a contemporary postmodern way of seeing. This is not only an aesthetic quest, it not only touches upon how art is produced and consumed in a commodity culture, it is as well a philosophical political commentary. The production and circulation of images shape our contemporary subjectivity subject formation. The visual becomes the site where the novel reflects about itself, but is also a site of critique of the modern subject and its commodification. The circulating discourses that Mao Tu critiques and in which it participates are mostly visual. Comparing the Lilo and Baudrillard, Wilcox argues that both see postmodern culture as an arena of a media-driven consumption of signs, of autonomous and free-floating signifiers, artificial codes, and simulational models. Both writers see terrorism as a canny adaptive response to the Western regime of image proliferation, sign exchange, and spectacle. At the center of terrorism and culture in the Lilo, we seem to find spectacle and the postmodern proliferation of consumable signs. The second part of my essay will be dedicated to the modern mimesis. So the second section is titled The Modern Novel and Mimesis. Here they come, marching into American sunlight. They are grouped in two's eternal boy-girl stepping out of the runway beyond the fence in left center field. The music draws them across the grass, dozens, hundreds, already too many to count. They assemble themselves so tightly, crossing the vast arc of the outfield, that the effect is one of transformation. From a series of linked couples, they become one continuous wave, larger all the time, covering the open spaces in navy and white. The opening paragraph stages movement. One single wave of bodies enters the scene. It is the mobility of the crowd, doubled by the fluid-like description, that which captures our attention. The crowd becomes the protagonist of the first chapter. Similarly, pristine descriptions will reappear throughout the novel whenever crowds are mentioned. Instead of an icon, an image, or a free-floating discourse, we have a vividly depicted scene from a moony mass wedding. This mimetic moment has a double in the closing scene. And here is the stunning thing that takes her a moment to understand, that this is a wedding party going by. The bride and groom carry champagne glasses, and some of the girls hold sparkles that set off showers of excited light. A guest in a pastel tuxedo smokes a long cigar and does a dance around a shell hole, delighting the kids. The bride's gown is beautiful, with lacy applique at the bodice, and she looks surpassingly alive. They all look transcendent, free of limits, and unsurprised to be here. Even grammatically, the scenes stand as doubles. Here they come in the opening scene, and here is the stunning thing in the closing scene. Both are tremendously alive descriptions of weddings. But while the first foreshadows the recurring theme of crowds, anxieties about the loss of individuality, and spiritual crisis, the closing scene in stark contrast returns to the communitarian and the folk carnivalesque. This closing scene seems to be an exit from the postmodern labyrinth of mirrors and iconicity. Life, as in the carnival, I use the term in Bakhtin's sense, is renovated. Times become cyclical. This possibility of renovation subverts the postmodern edifice the Lilo seems to erect. Conclusion: ethical engagement. I have tried to demonstrate that the Lilo does not renounce referentiality. Instead, the author stages different moments that appear sometimes contradictory. The postmodern is interwoven into Mao too, but the solution De Lillo offers to this funhouse mirror labyrinth is a return to referentiality, to the novel as a genre that has mimetic force. This return to the mimetic, I agree with Paul Giamo, is part of an ethical project. The novelist in Mao too, as the character of Brita, must carve out meaning. This meaning is necessarily intersubjective, communal, and therefore ethical. In the mutual recognition of our humanity, subjectivity, meaning can return to the modern disenchanted world.